Well, the status of the Crimea Bridge is important here. Russia is a signatory to the Geneva Accords and Protocol 1 of the Geneva Accords. The additional Protocol 1, which was in 1977, which had been pushed by the Soviet Union at that time and is still in effect, um, gives a definition of what constitutes military objects. And one thing that would constitute a military object are bridges that are used to transport um, military equipment. That becomes a military target. Now, Russia can say that there was no military equipment on the bridge at the time it was being attacked, and that's fine. But the bottom line is it's clear under international humanitarian law and the laws of war, as defined by accords that Russia has concurred with and agreed with and has signed on to, the Crimea Bridge is a legitimate target of war. End of story. Now, Russia will say that Russia is not at war with Ukraine, that this is a special military operation, and neither Russia nor Ukraine have declared a formal state of war. Russia will further note that the area of Krasnodar, where the bridge, where the part of the bridge that was struck, is not under martial law. It's peaceful civilian life, and that these were innocent civilians transiting the bridge when they were struck, and they were. There's no doubt about it. The two adults who died are innocent victims here, and it's tragic what happened to them and their 14-year-old daughter, and it's heartbreaking. There's no question about that. But I think here Russia is parsing words and playing word games. They're saying it's a terrorist attack because Russia's not at war with Ukraine. Ukraine's not at war with Russia, and the part of the bridge that was attacked was associated with the Krasnodar region, etc. But from an international humanitarian law perspective, this was a legitimate target. I know I'm going to make a lot of people unhappy when I say this, but it's just the way it is. What is Ukraine's purpose in striking this? Ukraine has struck the bridge before. And actually, the first attack against the bridge, even though the bridge is a legitimate target of war, used terroristic tactics, a car bomb driven by a civilian who may or may not have been witting as to whether or not there was a bomb in his vehicle. This was a terrorist action. It wasn't a military action. This attack appeared to make use of underwater drones of a military characteristic, so it falls in the category of a military attack. Why now? Ukraine is in the midst of a counteroffensive, one of the primary goals of which is to sever the land bridge between Russia proper and Crimea, to drive to the Sea of Azov, to capture or bring under fire control the highway that comes down from Russia through Mariupol, Melitopol, into Crimea. This ground attack, which was focused on the Zaporizhia area, has failed. It hasn't even come close to accomplishing this mission. And so one could make the argument that in order to support this attack, Ukraine sought to sever a strategic line of communication from southern Russia into Crimea, through which military materiel that supported the Russian defensive efforts in Zaporizhia were transiting. And one could make that argument. The problem is the timing. It appears that the Ukrainians timed this attack in relationship to the collapse of the Black Sea grain deal, and that this was purely a retaliation for Russia's withdrawal. And moreover, it appears that if the kind of weapon that has been discussed has yet to be confirmed by Russia, but it appears that this was a British-made underwater drone packed with additional explosives. The range of this weapon is such that it could not have been deployed from Ukrainian-controlled territory along the Black Sea from Odessa or elsewhere, that it would have had to have been transported by sea, or by ship into the Black Sea close to the Crimea coast, and then deployed from that ship to attack. And this would imply that Ukraine used ships that were operating under the protection of the Black Sea, the grain deal, and that these ships were traveling in the so-called green corridor, the safe corridor, out of Odessa. So Ukraine used the Black Sea grain deal to attack Crimea. It's a militarization of a peaceful food program. And this is, not just an act of war, but it's also a violation of the agreements. Ukraine is not supposed to be using this for military goods, but they have been for some time now. Russia's response has been devastating. They've attacked Odessa for the second night in a row. Who knows if the attacks will continue? The attacks are not only against the accumulation of military capabilities that have been building up in Odessa under the immunity granted to Odessa by the grain deal, but it appears that Russia has also taken out the port infrastructure that supported the grain deal, meaning that there will never be a grain deal again. It's over. No matter what the world wants, Odessa will never be used as a port to support this. So this is a severe punishment for Ukraine for what they've done in attacking the Crimea Bridge. Look, the attack against the Crimea Bridge did not sever the line of communication. The train line, which is the major supply route, that's where most of the military equipment comes in on, has been unscathed. The trains still run, and the road portion of the bridge will be repaired, and the bridge will be brought back into order. So this was a political move by the Ukrainians, and one has to ask, why? What is the purpose of this? And it appears that Ukraine is deliberately sabotaging the food program to create the perception amongst the international community of a global food crisis, that billions of people's lives will be put at risk because of the actions of Russia. And they're trying to mobilize international support against Russia. It's just one more example of Ukraine using extreme methods to create perceptions of Russian malfeasance. For instance, Ukraine's attack against the dam, which released the water, which created an ecological disaster in the Black Sea. Ukraine blamed it on Russia in hopes that the world would rally around it. Ukraine's threatening of the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. Ukraine's attack on the Kerch Bridge. All of these are designed to create a crisis environment that has global or regional ramifications in effort to get the world to rally behind Ukraine. And it's failed. We don't know what's going to happen with the grain deal right now, but one of the hopes of Ukraine was that Turkey would offer to escort ships, and that would put Russia in potential confrontation with the NATO. Remember, Turkey has said they're not going to do that. And anyways, it's a moot point because the Russians are destroying the port infrastructure, so there's nothing to escort. This is just part of the overall decomposition, one would say, of the Ukrainian position vis-a-vis NATO. We saw Ukraine receive a serious setback at Vilnius when NATO refused to even articulate a time frame for potential Ukrainian membership in NATO. We've seen further setback in the Ramstein contact group meeting, where Ukraine did not receive the equipment they were expecting. And I think we're going to see Ukraine disappointed on the current front, that the world will not rally behind it on the grain deal. So an act of desperation that failed to achieve its objectives. And at the end of the day, two innocent Russians are killed. A 14-year-old girl has lost her parents and lies in the hospital bed severely injured. People's lives have been disrupted, and Ukraine is still losing the war. Russia, from the very beginning of the special military operation, has been warning the United States, Great Britain, other NATO nations, European Union nations, etc., to stay out of the conflict. And they've put out a series of red lines, and many of these red lines have been crossed. Um, Russia, I believe, continues to voice its displeasure at um, foreign intervention in the conflict. And Russia has labeled this a conflict not as a war between Russia or a conflict between Russia and Ukraine, but a proxy conflict between Russia and the collective West, NATO, the United States, Great Britain. So, frankly speaking, the foreign ministry's statement is just the most recent iteration of saying the same thing. That Russia, from the Russia perspective, they know that the United States and Great Britain are involved, are to blame. It's a political statement with zero practical implications because Russia is not going to expand the war. This is what Ukraine wants. You see, Ukraine does what it does to create provocations to get a Russian overreaction that could be used to justify a NATO intervention. And Russia has been masterful at escalation management, preventing this from happening. So Russia will exclusively strike targets on the soil of Ukraine. Now, if a British target that was involved in the Odessa planning appears, I believe Russia would strike it. I don't think there would be any hesitancy on the part of Russia. Whether or not Russia would strike an American target of this nature is yet to be seen. Remember, if a lot of dead Americans head home in body bags, that could generate. Right now, Russia, I think, is, well, I won't say pleased. I think they're at least somewhat satisfied with the trajectory of the political situation in the United States, which appears to be moving towards Ukraine fatigue and a desire to get out of this conflict. So the last thing Russia would want to do is create an incident that enraged the Americans and reverse that. It got Americans talking about sending not only more support to Ukraine, but potentially sending Americans to Ukraine. That's not what Russia wants. So I think Russia is very careful in its responses to avoid this kind of overreaction. And there's no reason for Russia to overreact because right now Russia is prevailing on the battlefield decisively. I think one of the things that has emerged is a growing recognition by the collective West that Russia is not only not going to be defeated, but Russia is going to win and win decisively. You're starting to hear statements come out from major players in the Biden administration admitting that, even the president himself, we don't have any ammunition left to give. It's impossible for the United States defense industry to start putting getting production in place to replace the stuff that's being used in Ukraine. Ukraine can't succeed in the counteroffensive. We're not going to give Ukraine the F-16s, things of this nature. You're starting to see it all pile up, and you're starting to see voices that were used to be talking in glowing terms about Ukraine's destiny to have victory, now saying that Ukraine will not win this war. That's a reflection of ground truth. Russia is prevailing. I think the West is starting to also wake up to the reality that while Ukraine had received 65,000 trained troops in the last, effort by NATO, that over 20,000 of these troops are now dead. The rest are doomed to die, and there's nothing left to replace them. Russia, on the other hand, has between 180 and 200,000 fresh reserves that have yet to be deployed into this conflict, reserves that have been training, organizing for the past several months. And at some point in time, Russia is going to commit these reserves to the battle. And when they do so, Ukraine will have nothing to respond with. And this will lead to a rapid devolvement of the military situation for Ukraine. This is Russia's perspective. So Russia is not going to do anything that disrupts this trajectory. So they're not going to attack the United States, attack the United Kingdom, attack NATO. They're going to continue doing what they're doing, but they will call out America and call out Britain for what they see as the nefarious nature of their actions.